Every animal on Earth eats its food raw. Every single one. Lions do not marinate their kills. Wolves do not season anything. Gorillas do not roast their fruit. Dolphins have never once, in the entire history of the species, assembled anything you could fairly call a meal. Then there is us. Every human culture ever discovered, on every continent, in every climate, from the most isolated hunter-gatherer band to a downtown high-rise with a smart oven, cooks its food. Not most cultures. All of them, without exception. It is the one truly universal human behavior. Not language, which varies wildly in structure. Not tool use, which other animals also manage in limited ways. Cooking, heat, deliberately applied to food before it goes in your mouth. Only humans do it, and every human does it. And here is the part almost nobody thinks about. You are not just cooking because it tastes better. It does taste better, dramatically so, and we will get to why. You are cooking because you probably cannot survive without doing it. Somewhere in the deep past, the human body was reorganized around fire. Your jaw is weaker than a chimpanzee's. Your gut is shorter. Your teeth are smaller. Nearly every part of your digestive system has been quietly reshaped by an ancestor who made one of the most consequential decisions in the history of life on Earth, and then had their entire body rebuilt around that decision for the next 2 million years. The strange part, we still do not know exactly how it started. We do not know if the first cooking was deliberate or an accident. We do not know if someone watched food fall into a wildfire or stumbled onto it some other way. We do not even know for certain whether the first cooked meal was meat or a root vegetable. What we do know is that somewhere, at some point, a hominid tasted heated food, recognized it as better, and something in the trajectory of the species snapped irreversibly in a new direction. To understand how big that snap really was, you need to see what came before it. About 2 million years ago, before any of this happened, our ancestor Australopithecus was upright, increasingly clever, and living across the African savanna on essentially the same diet a chimpanzee eats today. Raw fruit, tough, fibrous raw roots that are barely digestible, raw leaves, bark, shoots, the occasional insect, or small animal. That kind of diet demands an enormous amount of chewing. Modern chimpanzees spend roughly half of every waking hour just eating, not hunting, not socializing, not doing anything you would call cognitively interesting, chewing. Because raw food needs so much mechanical breakdown before your body can pull anything useful out of it. Your entire day gets structured around one repetitive task. Harvard anthropologist Richard Wrangham spent years in Uganda eating what chimpanzees eat, trying to understand the experience from the inside. His conclusion, delivered with a dry understatement only a scientist could manage, was that the food was genuinely terrible. Hard, bitter, exhausting to chew for as long as it took to actually swallow it. 10 minutes on a single piece of wild fruit for almost no reward. That experience planted a question that would not let go. Modern humans, with our small jaws and short guts, could not survive on that diet. Not, wouldn't want to, could not. Something must have changed us, something that freed us from spending half our lives chewing, and that something should be visible in the fossil record. Wrangham arrived at his answer staring into his own fireplace in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1997, cooking, not meat eating, which other researchers had proposed as the great turning point, not bigger brains that somehow came first and figured out cooking afterward. Cooking itself, fire applied to food before it's eaten, was the engine. He published the hypothesis in 1999 in the journal Current Anthropology and expanded it a decade later in his widely read book, Catching Fire. His claim is a complete reversal of what most people assume. We did not get smart and then invent cooking. We started cooking, and as a direct biological consequence, our brains grew. To see why that claim actually holds up, you have to look at what heat does to food at the molecular level because it is far more radical than most people realize. Take a starchy food. A potato, a grain, a root vegetable. Heat causes the starch granules inside to absorb water and swell, a process called gelatinization. Raw starch is tightly packed and crystalline, which makes it physically difficult for your digestive enzymes to get at. Cooking blows that structure wide open. Your gut can now reach far more of it and convert it to usable glucose. Eat the exact same potato raw versus cooked, and the cooked version hands your body dramatically more energy from an identical object. Heat does something just as significant to protein. Raw meat is full of tough connective tissue that your stomach acid struggles to break down. Heat unravels those proteins into simpler shapes. Your enzymes can process far more easily. It ruptures plant cell walls too, releasing nutrients that would otherwise stay locked behind cellulose cell. Your body cannot break through on its own. And heat neutralizes many of the natural toxins and pathogens plants evolved specifically to keep animals from eating them. In other words, cooking is pre-digestion. You are doing a serious chunk of the chemical work of breaking food down before it ever touches your mouth. using fire as an external stomach. That means your actual digestive system gets an easier job and burns less energy finishing the process. More usable calories for less metabolic cost. Studies comparing identical meals, cooked versus raw, consistently find the same result. Cooked food delivers more extractable energy in an environment where calories are scarce and every competitor wants them too. That is not a minor upgrade. That is the difference between thriving and barely scraping by. Then there's the time. Raw, fibrous plant material demands enormous amounts of chewing before you could even swallow it. Cooked food is dramatically softer because heat has already done the structural demolition work your teeth would otherwise have to do. Wrangham estimates that pre-cooking hominids may have spent close to half their waking hours chewing. Once cooking became routine, that dropped to something close to the 1 hour a day modern humans typically spend eating. Sit with that for a second. 4 or 5 additional productive hours every single day for hundreds of thousands of years. Think about what your ancestors could do with that reclaimed time. Hunt with better strategy, build more sophisticated tools, teach skills to the next generation. Sleep longer. Plan for tomorrow instead of spending every waking moment on the immediate business of staying fed. The campfire was never just a cooking surface. It was a security perimeter, keeping nocturnal predators at a distance so people could finally sleep on open ground instead of up in trees. It was a heat source that extended where people could comfortably live, a gathering point that made sustained group interaction possible, and a time-liberating technology whose effects compounded across every generation that followed. Now, here is the part that should genuinely stop you. Look at what happened to the human body in the fossil record around the time cooking is thought to have begun. About 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus shows up, and compared to everything before it, the differences are stark. A noticeably bigger brain, a taller, longer-legged frame built for sustained walking and running, and, critically, a smaller jaw, smaller teeth, and a shorter gut. That gut reduction deserves its own moment, because it might be the single most striking change in the entire fossil record of human evolution. Chimpanzees and other primates carry an enormous digestive system relative to their body size, a big stomach, a long, small intestine, and an oversized colon built to slowly ferment huge quantities of tough, raw plant matter. That apparatus is expensive. It needs a constant blood supply, it generates heat, and it demands a steady stream of food just to keep itself running. But if you are surviving on raw, low-density vegetation, you need it. In Homo erectus, that system had shrunk noticeably, especially the fermenting colon, most relevant to processing raw fiber. And in modern humans, that trend has gone even further. One researcher put it memorably. Other primates carry a gut that weighs roughly 4 times as much as their brain. In modern humans, the brain actually outweighs the gut. Less gut, more brain. That trait only works biologically if the food entering that smaller gut is dramatically more calorie-dense and easier to digest than what came before. And the timing lines up precisely with the shift to cooking. Soft cooked food needs less jaw power, so natural selection stopped maintaining the oversized chewing apparatus raw food demands, and jaws and teeth shrank across generations. More digestible, calorie-dense cooked food means you need far less gut to extract an adequate daily intake, so natural selection could downsize the digestive system without any cost to survival, and the metabolic energy saved by carrying less gut tissue got reallocated to the single most calorie-hungry organ in the entire body, the brain, which was already expanding fast and which, in modern humans, burns roughly 20% of your total daily energy. Brazilian neuroscientist Susana Herculano-Houzel ran the actual numbers on this. A gorilla already spends close to 9 hours a day eating just to sustain its current brain and body size. For a gorilla to grow a brain the size of a human's on its current raw diet, it would need to add roughly 2 more hours of feeding on top of that, pushing the total past 10 hours a day. There simply are not enough daylight hours left to make that work. The math does not close. The only way around that ceiling is to make the food itself dramatically more efficient. Cooking did exactly that. For a long time, the hardest part of Wrangham's theory was the archaeological record. If cooking began with Homo erectus 1.8 million years ago, where was the physical evidence? The oldest confirmed fire use for decades came from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, where burned bone and ash deep inside the cave, far from any wildfire's reach, were dated to about 1 million years ago. That left an uncomfortably large gap between when the theory said cooking should have started and when the evidence actually showed up, roughly 800,000 years. But that gap has been closing. New analysis of the Wonderwork Cave deposits, published in 2026, pushed the confirmed fire evidence there back to as far as 1.79 million years ago, startlingly close to Wrangham's original prediction. And a separate discovery at Gesher Benat Yaakov in northern Israel, published in 2022, identified freshwater fish teeth that had clearly been heated at low temperature before the fish were eaten, dated to 780,000 years ago. That is currently the oldest direct evidence of cooking a specific meal, as opposed to fire use in general. By around 400,000 years ago, the evidence is no longer sparse. It is everywhere. Hearths, burned bones, fire-cracked stones, and early ovens turn up across sites in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. By the time Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens were active, cooking was not a novelty. It was routine, foundational knowledge, passed down deliberately across generations. Exactly when it began is still debated. That it began and that it changed everything is not. Here is where it gets genuinely unsettling, and it's worth sitting with fully. Humans cannot survive on raw food. Not in a "you'd feel a little tired" sense. In a measurable, biologically catastrophic sense. There are modern communities who choose to eat entirely raw, unprocessed food as a lifestyle. Study after study finds the same pattern. They cannot maintain a stable body weight over time without leaning on modern technological supplements because they burn more metabolic energy processing raw food than they extract from it. They are running a caloric deficit that gets worse the longer it continues. Roughly a third of women under 45 on strict long-term raw food diets develop amenorrhea, the complete or partial shutdown of their menstrual cycle. That is the body's emergency signal that it does not have enough energy to spare for reproduction. It shuts down fertility before it shuts down anything else. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, a diet that switches off reproduction in a third of the women eating, it is about as close to a fitness catastrophe as a diet can get. Those modern raw food communities are, in effect, an accidental real-world experiment confirming Wrangham's decades-old theory. Our bodies were reshaped by hundreds of thousands of years of cooked food, and we have simply lost the infrastructure needed to run on the raw version. The oversized fermenting colon, gone. The powerful jaw and broad molar surface, gone. The slow, patient gut built to wring nutrition out of raw fiber over hours, gone. What replaced all of it? The shorter gut, the smaller jaw, the bigger brain only works as a package if the food coming in has already been processed by heat. Chimpanzees can live on raw food because their entire body is built for it. From the jaw down to the metabolism, humans are built for cooked food. Somewhere between 1 and 2 million years ago, our bodies crossed a threshold with no evolutionary way back. We are, as far as anyone can tell, the only species in the history of life on Earth that genuinely cannot feed itself without a piece of technology. There is also a social side to this story that is arguably just as significant and considerably more interesting to sit with. Cooking creates something raw foraging never does. A meal, a shared, prepared thing, made at a specific time and place, consumed together. When your food has to be cooked, you gather somewhere to cook it. You need fire, which takes real effort to start and maintain. You need someone to guard it and tend it while it's being prepared. You need some kind of understanding about who contributes what and who gets what back. In Wrangham's account, the campfire is not just a cooking surface. It is, arguably, the origin of the household, the most basic unit of human social organization. It's the place where having a reliable partner starts to pay off biologically. Someone who will protect your cooked food while you're out gathering more, and share what they have while you do the same for them. This is where Wrangham makes his most provocative claim, that cooking may be the origin of the sexual division of labor and of pair bonding itself. Not romantic love as a cultural invention, but a practical arrangement where two people coordinate resource gathering and share food, anchored to a hearth with children as the reason it matters. And think about what happens once people are actually gathered around that fire in the evening. Caloric needs met, predators kept at a distance by the flame, hours of non-chewing time available before sleep. That is exactly the environment where language flourishes. Storytelling becomes useful, where food was found, what dangers were spotted, which relationships need tending. Laughter, music, planning, rehearsing tomorrow's strategy. All of it becomes possible the moment you are not spending every waking hour either chewing or foraging for the next mouthful. The fire did not just feed the brain. It created the conditions that let the brain start doing the things that eventually made us recognizably human. So the next time you turn on a burner, or light a grill, or just stand over a pan, watching something come to a simmer, it's worth taking 1 second to register the actual weight of what you're doing. You are participating in the oldest, most consequential, most singularly human technology our species has ever developed. Older than agriculture by at least 1 million years. Older than writing by an almost unimaginable margin. Older than religion, cities, or government. Arguably, older than language itself. You are doing something your ancestors were doing around modest fires on the African savanna more than 1 million years ago. Something that rewired the entire trajectory of the primate lineage. It shrank your jaw. It shortened your gut. It freed your time. It protected your nights. It organized your social world. And it liberated enough biological energy to build the brain you are using right now to understand this sentence. Every meal you cook is, in the deepest sense available, a continuation of the exact act that made you human in the first place, which is a genuinely profound thought, even at 11 p.m., standing in a dark kitchen, realizing the pasta has stuck to the bottom of the pan.